Hello, my name is Anna Spenceley, and it's a pleasure to be joining you today at this ITB event on sustainable tourism. I've been working on sustainable tourism issues for the past 2 decades, and over the past year I've been working on a series of assignments analysing the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector and its implications for conservation, livelihoods and sustainability. These are the topics I've been asked to share ideas on today, starting with how the tourism industry has been affected by COVID-19. As we're all aware, the pandemic has affected almost every part of the world and has had a global impact on the travel sector in particular. The UNWTO reports that between January and May 2020, 100% of global destinations imposed travel restrictions, and 45% totally or partially closed their borders for tourists. UNWTO's Tourism Recovery Tracker helps to illustrate how travel restrictions have changed over the course of 2020. And by September 2020, these restrictions had been eased in 53% of destinations, and travel was cautiously re-emerging. The impact of these restrictions on international arrivals across the world has been dramatic. Analysis shows how international tourist arrivals have been affected across the globe in both developed and less developed economies. Destinations that have been most vulnerable are those that are highly dependent on tourism in their economies, including small island developing states, and also those that rely on international tourism with little domestic travel. Places that had previously suffered from over-tourism were suddenly emptied. And the economic impacts have been stark. Looking at just the effect of protected area closures in Brazil during 2020 and a 50% drop in visits, it's been estimated that this generated a loss of 55,000 permanent or temporary jobs and a loss of $410 million in income for employees and business owners. So what has the crisis meant for the tourism sector and vulnerable groups? For the purposes of illustration, let's look at the impact on the wildlife tourism sector and communities on the African continent. The reason for this focus is that the wildlife tourism's value has greater magnitude on this continent than any other. Africa has iconic wildlife destinations, diverse, protected and conserved area systems, and there is much support for local livelihoods who are immersed in wildlife economies. SafariBookings.com has been conducting monthly surveys amongst the hundreds of operators it serves on its online booking platforms. Their data shows the dramatic change that took place from March to April 2020, and that since then there hasn't been much improvement in terms of the booking numbers. One of my assignments was a survey for the EU, which was done to better understand the impact of the pandemic on wildlife tourism in protected areas, and in particular, looking at the impact on conservation, businesses, and local economies. In this online survey, there were 730 responses from Africa between April and June 2020, and responses came from accommodations, tour operators, activities and experience providers, restaurants and bar services, and also hunting operators. On average, 3/4 of their customers are normally international clients. On average, the operators reported 63% fewer customers at the time of the survey, while the number of future booking requests was down by 72%. There was also a massive number of cancellations from March to June 2020, in fact 83% on average. In response to the challenges, nearly all of the operators implemented measures to mitigate the impacts. The majority offered customers the option to reschedule their trip or had changed their cancellation or refund policies. However, many were forced to close their facilities temporarily, downscale significantly, and 2% had to close permanently. More than half the employees of the operators are recruited locally, meaning within 50 kilometres, but by June 2020 most local staff were on reduced wages, and more than half of operators had to put some local staff on leave without pay. If the crisis continued, it was estimated that over 17,000 local employees working for tourism operators, just for those people surveyed here, would be adversely and directly affected. And aside from the numbers, the stories that operators tell of their efforts to support their staff are highly emotive. Something is really needed to sustain this sector for its survival and to retain all the benefits it generates for local people and conservation. The financial losses for protected areas that are owned privately or through conservancies have been particularly devastating. Pastoralist landowners in conservancies in Kenya, like the Maasai and Samburu, have seen substantial declines in their rental payments as international tourism disappeared. There are fears that uncertainty over tourism recovery may lead community conservancies to sell their land or convert wildlife habitats to agriculture, cattle ranching, or charcoal production. So, as we've seen, the impacts of COVID-19 in tourism destinations are highly varied and complex. So what are the needs and challenges to building back better tourism? Recognizing our previous challenges with nature, pollution and climate, many webinars and discussion pieces have focused on creating a better way forward for the planet and for us all. For example, the UN Secretary-General has emphasized rebuilding tourism in a safe, equitable and climate-friendly way, promoting 5 priority areas for action. It's encouraging that market intelligence suggests that traveller priorities will include sustainability, in addition to their health, social well-being and contributions to local economy during the recovery period. UNWTO has mapped out different scenarios for the recovery of international tourism based on different timeframes for opening national borders and lifting travel restrictions. However, they predict that a return to 2019 levels may take between 2.5 and 4 years. And recovery of the global industry may also be hampered by the damage that's been done to the industry, including declines in airline routes, cruises, workforce reductions, and also company insolvencies. But in our rush to escape lockdowns and get back outside, we've seen a resurgence of domestic travel with drawbacks, particularly in Europe, Asia, and North America. There are places where protected area managers have not been prepared to manage a huge influx of new cohorts of visitors, and these visitors have left waste behind them, including single-use plastics and disposable protective equipment like face masks. The tourism industry is calling for a broad range of support, including for financial support and technical support, as illustrated from the Africa survey that I shared earlier. And nature-based tourism operators in Africa are mainly seeking funds of under $250,000 and are looking for grants or debt that has low interest or flexible repayment terms. And these needs are urgent. A Game Lodge survey that was done back in June 2020 in South Africa showed that the majority would have finished their cash reserves by October-December last year. It's now March 2021, and I don't know which of these survived and which were already forced to close permanently. Still, there is a desire to build back better amongst many, but there are concerns that the industry will simply go back to business as usual and miss the opportunity to transform into a more sustainable and resilient sector. So what can we do? How can we recover with a more sustainable tourism industry that conserves biodiversity, reduces pollution, addresses the existential climate crisis, and supports the livelihoods of the most vulnerable? Well, I think we need to share more ideas, examples that will guide destinations and the tourism sector towards better practices. And this can be done through sharing written materials, and by continuing to use webinars and online meetings to share thoughts and insights from across the world. We need to continue to provide technical resources that explain how to operate tourism amid COVID and adapt them as scientific understanding of the coronavirus improves. Let's reinforce messaging about sustainable tourism, recognizing the difficulties of undertaking tourism at all at this time, sustainably or otherwise, when conditions and restrictions are changing so rapidly. And of course, funding needs to be sourced to sustain the destinations, companies and livelihoods. Many countries have developed rescue packages to support the tourism sector during the crisis, and there have also been international grants and technical support initiatives too. There's been an emphasis on systems that promote sustainability to make investment pandemic and climate-proof, while supporting livelihoods of people through the tourism value chain. However, the values achieved through crowdsourcing and grants are mostly small and mainly under $50,000. Also, the number of applications for grants by far exceeds what's currently available. We also need to rethink how we measure success. Do we want to continue looking at success by establishing the rate of growth of international arrivals and overall revenues? Or do we want to adjust our metrics from quantity and financial values and instead measure sustainability and quality of life for host populations instead? It's up to us to decide. Collective action is needed to transform tourism's contribution to the 2030 Agenda and Paris Agreement. Therefore, we need to expand and reinforce partnerships that use the power of coalitions and cooperation to push for responsible recovery. The energy and drive to improve across government, private sector and civil society make me optimistic that there's real impetus to build back better and greener. I hope that this presentation contributes to this ITB Sustainable Tourism session, and thank you very much for your attention.